You earn 10K, so why is your child hungry? Dad asked. My husband smiled and said, I gave my salary to my mom. Dad said nothing, took off his jacket, and did something that reminded me why I love him the most. Dad came to take my daughter Aria for the weekend. He opened the fridge, empty. Sweetheart, you earn $10,000 a month. Why is your child hungry? He asked, his voice steady but edged with concern. My husband Thomas came out from the living room, chest puffed with pride. I gave her salary to my mother, he announced, as if he'd done something noble. Dad stayed silent. He took off his leather jacket, draped it carefully over the kitchen chair, and did something that reminded me why I love him most. My name is Clara Hutchins. I'm 32 years old, and if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Have you ever watched respect drain from someone's face? Not because of words, but because of truth they can't deny? The air in our Sacramento kitchen was thick, almost suffocating. Dad's jaw tightened as his eyes swept over the bare shelves, the single carton of orange juice, the leftovers wrapped in foil like forgotten secrets. My daughter Aria peeked from behind my leg, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Whiskers. Her wide eyes took in everything, understanding more than a 5-year-old should. Is this true? Dad asked quietly, his gaze fixed on Thomas. I wanted to lie, to protect whatever shreds remained of my marriage. But the silence between Thomas and me answered for both of us. Thomas shrugged, leaning against the granite countertop we'd picked out together 3 years ago. It's not a big deal, Richard. My mom needed it. She's family. Dad's voice dropped an octave, that tone he used when he meant business. And what about this family? Thomas actually laughed, a sharp, defensive sound. He crossed his arms over his polo shirt. You wouldn't understand, old man. Some of us actually respect our parents. The words hung in the air like poison. Dad's gaze sharpened, cutting through Thomas's smugness like a blade. Respect isn't obedience, son. It's responsibility. Then he turned to me, his expression softening just slightly. Go pack Arya's overnight bag. I blinked. What? Pack it, he said firmly, leaving no room for argument. She's coming with me. Something inside me trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. I'd seen that protective tone before, when Dad used to stand up for Mom during those rare, quiet wars in our childhood home in Portland, when creditors called, when relatives overstepped, when someone dared to make his family feel small. As I zipped Arya's pink backpack in her bedroom, stuffing in her favorite pajamas with the stars and her toothbrush, I heard Thomas's voice rise from the kitchen. You're not taking her anywhere, Richard. Dad didn't argue. I heard him reach for his phone, his voice calm and measured as he made a single call. By the time I came back downstairs with Arya's hand in mine, a Sacramento police cruiser was pulling up outside our townhouse. Thomas wasn't smiling anymore. His face had gone pale, the color of old newspaper. When the officers left 20 minutes later, after checking on Arya's well-being and documenting the empty fridge with photos, the house fell into an oppressive silence. Only the low hum of that same empty refrigerator filled the space, a constant reminder of everything that had been exposed. Dad rolled up the sleeves of his blue dress shirt, revealing forearms still strong despite his 60 years. He opened his wallet and pulled out his credit card, sliding it across the counter toward me. Go get your daughter something real to eat, he said. His voice wasn't angry, it was disappointed, which somehow cut deeper than any shouting could. Thomas stood by the bay window overlooking our small yard, arms crossed defensively. You didn't have to call the police, Richard. That was dramatic, unnecessary. Dad looked at him with the kind of calm that precedes a storm. You stole from my daughter and let your child go hungry. I should have called a family court judge instead. I stood there frozen between them, guilt and relief mixing like oil and water in my chest. Part of me wanted to defend Thomas, to smooth things over like I always did. But a larger part of me, the part that had been slowly suffocating, felt something shift. Dad took a slow breath. then did something unexpected. He walked out to his Ford F-150 and started unloading grocery bags from the truck bed. Bags of food, milk, fresh strawberries, chicken breasts, pasta, Arya's favorite Cheerios with the B on the box. "Sit," he told me, setting the bags on the counter. "You haven't eaten either, have you?" I shook my head, unable to trust my voice. He moved around my kitchen like he belonged there, humming the same tune he used to whistle when I was little. Some old Johnny Cash song. Within minutes, the kitchen transformed. The smell of butter melting in a pan replaced the stale air of defeat. He scrambled eggs, toasted bread, sliced strawberries into a bowl. He placed a plate in front of Arya and knelt to her level. "A man who feeds others never lets his family starve, sweetheart. Remember that." Arya nodded solemnly, her small hands reaching for the toast. Thomas mumbled from his position by the window. "You're making me look bad." Dad turned to him slowly. "You did that yourself." Then Dad opened his leather briefcase, the same one he'd carried to his accounting firm for 30 years, and pulled out a folded document. He slid it across the counter toward Thomas with deliberate precision. "You wanted control? Fine. Sign this financial disclosure agreement. Every cent you spend from Clara's salary goes on record. Receipts, bank transfers, everything documented." Thomas's face went pale. "You can't be serious." "I'm more than serious," Dad said, folding his jacket neatly over the back of a chair. "I'm her father, and today I'm reminding you what that means." Arya giggled softly, spooning cereal into her mouth. For the first time in months, our house didn't feel hollow. By evening, tension sat thick in our living room like morning fog rolling off the Pacific. Thomas paced back and forth on our beige carpet, muttering under his breath, while Dad sat calmly on the couch, legs crossed, sipping tea from Mom's old floral china as if this were a casual visit and not a full-blown reckoning. "Look, Richard," Thomas began, forcing what he probably thought was a charming smile. "You don't understand the full picture. My mother's alone in Fresno. She needed the money for her medical bills, heart medication, physical therapy." Dad looked up, his expression unchanged. "Then you should have worked for it yourself, not stolen it from your wife's paycheck while your daughter went hungry." His tone was even, conversational almost, but the silence that followed cracked like thunder. I spoke quietly from the armchair, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't even know my direct deposit was being rerouted. He changed the email and password on our joint account at Valley Credit Union." Dad turned his gaze to Thomas. "That true?" No response. Just that familiar twitch at the corner of Thomas's mouth. Guilt dressed up as arrogance, defiance masking shame. Dad sighed, stood, and reached into his briefcase again. This time he pulled out a thicker folder. "Then this will make things simpler." He placed a set of documents on the coffee table with deliberate care. Printed bank statements highlighted in yellow. A notarized letter from his accountant, Philip Wong, and a draft motion for financial abuse, stamped with a family law attorney's letterhead. "I called a friend from the Sacramento County Courthouse," Dad said, his finger tracing a line of numbers. "You've been draining $3,500 every month from her salary for the past 14 months. All traceable. All recoverable. That's nearly $50,000. The number hung in the air. I felt dizzy. Thomas's voice broke, cracking like thin ice. "You wouldn't actually file that." "I would," Dad interrupted, his voice harder now. "But only if you don't fix this yourself. Starting now." He walked over to where I sat and crouched beside my chair, his voice softening. "Clara, tomorrow morning, you're going to transfer your paycheck into a new account. I'll help you set it up at a different bank. We'll separate everything: checking, savings, credit cards. Clean break." For a moment, I couldn't speak. This wasn't just protection. It was proof that someone still saw me, really saw me, as more than just a wife, more than just a paycheck. As Dad gathered his papers and prepared to leave, Thomas whispered, "You're destroying our marriage, Richard." Dad didn't even look back as he reached for the door. No, son, you did that when you confused control with love. The front door closed behind him with a soft click, and for the first time in years, I felt the air in the house shift, heavy turning to clean, stale turning to breathable. The next morning, California sunlight cut through our bedroom blinds, slicing the room into strips of gold and harsh truth. I sat at the kitchen table, Dad's documents spread out before me like a roadmap to freedom disguised as paperwork. Thomas stumbled in around 7:30, hair disheveled, eyes red from a sleepless night. His Stanford t-shirt was wrinkled, his usual put-together appearance cracked. "You called your father on me," he said, his voice brittle as autumn leaves. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? My own father-in-law treating me like a criminal." I looked up from the financial disclosure forms. "You're humiliated because you got caught, Thomas, not because you did something wrong." He leaned forward, fists pressing against the table hard enough to make the papers shift. "You're blowing this completely out of proportion. I helped my family. You should respect that. That's what marriage is, sacrifice." I met his stare, finding strength I didn't know I still had. And who respected mine? Who respected Arya when she asked for breakfast 3 days ago and I had to tell her we'd eat later? When later never came? He looked away. No answer. Just the sound of the kitchen clock ticking. At 9 o'clock sharp, Dad's Ford F-150 pulled up outside. He stepped out wearing khakis and a button-down, holding a Starbucks cup in one hand and a leather folder in the other. "Ready?" he asked through the screen door, his voice gentle but determined. Thomas scoffed from behind me. "You really think you can just take her money now? That's still our joint account." Dad didn't even glance his way. "No, I'm helping her take it back." We drove downtown Sacramento in comfortable silence, the city waking around us. Morning commuters filled the streets. The Tower Bridge gleamed in the distance. Everything looked different somehow, sharper, more real. At Wells Fargo on Capitol Avenue, Dad introduced himself to the branch manager, apparently an old friend from his Rotary Club days. Within 30 minutes, I had a new checking account, a separate savings account, my own credit card, and legal protection paperwork filed. Dad waited patiently through every signature, his calm presence like a shield between me and my fear. When it was done, he looked at me across the manager's desk and said softly, "Don't apologize for being smart, Clara. You just needed someone to remind you it's okay to use it." That evening, when Thomas came home from his warehouse supervisor job, the house felt different. The air wasn't tense anymore. It was mine again, reclaimed territory. On the counter, I left a note on Arya's construction paper. "My money feeds my child, not your pride." And for once, I didn't wait around for his reaction. Arya and I went to the park, and I pushed her on the swings until the sun set, orange and purple over the Sacramento skyline. By the weekend, the silence in our house had changed shape. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was purposeful, like the calm before rebuilding. Arya colored quietly at the kitchen table with her new crayons while I sorted through months of neglected bills and credit card statements. Every paper I picked up felt like a confession I'd been forced to live through. Late notices, overdraft fees, collection warnings for utilities I'd thought were paid. Dad came by again Saturday morning, this time without warning. He stepped inside, looked around at the cardboard boxes I'd started packing, and nodded approvingly at the ones labeled with blue tape. Mine. "You've started packing," he observed, setting down a bag from Home Depot. More boxes, packing tape, markers. "I'm not sure where we're going yet," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I can't stay here. Not anymore." He smiled faintly, that sad smile that held both pride and heartbreak. "You don't need to know where yet, sweetheart. You just need to know you're leaving." Before I could respond, Thomas's Toyota Camry pulled into the driveway with a screech. His door slammed, footsteps quick and angry on the walkway. He burst through the door. eyes flicking between Dad and me like a trapped animal. "You're turning my daughter against me," he snapped, pointing at Arya. "You think your father's some kind of hero? He's just an interfering old man who doesn't understand modern marriage." Dad didn't flinch. He stood slowly from the couch, his full height suddenly imposing. "No, Thomas. I'm just a man who doesn't let cowards hide behind excuses." Thomas's voice rose, cracking. "You don't understand marriage. You don't understand what it takes to balance two families. Maybe not yours," Dad interrupted calmly. "But I understand decency. I understand that a man doesn't steal from his wife while his child goes hungry." He took a slow step closer, lowering his tone to something almost gentle, which made it more powerful. "If you cared about your family, you'd have filled that fridge before running to your mother. You'd have worked overtime. You'd have found another way." The words hung in the air like smoke. Even Thomas's anger couldn't cut through them. He backed toward the door, muttering curses under his breath, and stormed out. The Camry's engine roared to life, tires squealing as he sped away. When the sound faded into the distance, Dad turned to me and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "This isn't the end, Clara. It's the beginning of you becoming the mother Arya deserves, the woman you've always been." Arya looked up from her drawing of a house with a big sun. "Grandpa, are you staying for dinner?" Dad chuckled, the tension finally breaking. "I brought groceries this time, kiddo. Let's make something special. How about tacos?" "Yes," Arya cheered, jumping up. And for the first time in months, dinner didn't taste like survival. It tasted like home. By Monday morning, I'd made my decision. I filed for legal separation at the Sacramento County Superior Court. It wasn't a dramatic scene, just quiet signatures on thick paper, and the feeling of chains snapping link by link. Dad drove me to the courthouse on H Street, Arya's laughter echoing in the back seat as she clutched a juice box like it was liquid victory. Inside, the clerk stamped my forms without ceremony, her manicured nails clicking against the paperwork. "You'll get your preliminary hearing date within 2 weeks, Mrs. Patterson," she said matter-of-factly. Dad thanked her, then turned to me as we walked down the marble steps into the California sunshine. "How do you feel?" I hesitated, searching for the right word. "Free? Terrified?" "Both." He smiled, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "That means you're doing it right." Back home, the townhouse felt hollow. Furniture still in place, but the energy gone, like a stage after the actors leave. Thomas had taken some of his clothes overnight, a few electronics, his gaming system. Everything else he'd left behind, as if abandoning the weight of his choices. I spent that night reorganizing the kitchen cabinets. Cans lined up neatly. Fresh groceries stacked where emptiness used to live. When Arya woke up for water around midnight, she blinked at the shelves in surprise. "Mommy, it's full," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Yeah, baby," I whispered back, pulling her into a hug. "It's full again, and it's staying that way." Later, I sat by the living room window with chamomile tea, scrolling through messages from coworkers at the marketing firm where I worked. Women who had seen my vague social media posts about financial control and reached out privately. "You're brave. Your story gave me courage to confront my own husband. Can you help me set up my own account? I don't know where to start." I thought I was the only one. "Thank you for speaking up." I typed careful replies one by one, my heart both breaking and swelling. When Dad called that night, his voice was soft with emotion. "Your story is helping more people than you know, Clara." I looked at Arya asleep on the couch, her hand still holding Mr. Whiskers, her chest rising and falling peacefully. "It's helping me too," I said quietly. Outside, streetlights glowed against the glass, steady, unshaken, like promises being kept. Tomorrow I'd start over, not as Richard's daughter, not as Thomas's wife, just as Clara, and that would be enough. The following week, I met Dad downtown at the Firehouse restaurant for lunch. He was already seated when I arrived, scrolling through his phone with that half smile he wore when pretending not to worry. Court date come in? He asked, setting down his phone. I nodded, sliding into the booth. 2 weeks from Friday. Thomas is contesting custody, but my lawyer says it's a weak case. He doesn't even have stable employment anymore. Got fired from the warehouse for missing too many shifts. Dad folded his menu, a grim satisfaction crossing his face. That's what happens when people build empires on someone else's paycheck. The foundation crumbles. We ordered burgers, and halfway through the meal, he leaned back against the leather booth. You know, when you were 16, I used to wonder if you'd ever see yourself the way I saw you. Sharp, patient, unbreakable. I guess I finally have my answer. I smiled, blinking back tears. You saw me long before I did, Dad. After lunch, I walked through downtown Sacramento alone, taking in the Victorian architecture and the buzz of the city. Everything looked sharper, more vivid, like I'd been watching life through fog and it had finally cleared. I stopped at a bookstore and bought Aria a children's atlas. So you can see the world's bigger than one house, I'd tell her later. That night when I came home, I found an envelope slid under the door. Thomas's handwriting on the front, my name in his familiar scrawl. Inside, a check for $10,000 and a single note on lined paper. Clara, I'm sorry. Mom was wrong about controlling the money. I was wrong about everything. I'll sign whatever you want. Just please let me see Arya sometimes. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at the paper. Not out of pity, out of closure. When Dad called that evening, I read him the note. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "He's not apologizing to you, Clara. He's surrendering to the woman he never thought you'd become." I smiled into the silence of my house now. Then let him surrender, because forgiveness isn't a door he can walk through anymore. It's one I've already closed. 2 months later, the court hearing came and went quietly. Thomas didn't contest. He signed full custody to me, agreed to supervised visitation every other weekend, and handed over his share of the townhouse. He left the courtroom without looking back. No grand speeches, no last words, just silence. The kind that tells you a storm has finally passed. Outside, Dad was waiting by his Ford, leaning against the hood in the September sunshine. "You're officially free," he said, slipping his arm around my shoulders as we walked to his truck. Free. The word tasted new, like something I hadn't earned before but had finally grown into. That night, I stood in the kitchen with Arya, baking chocolate chip cookies, something simple, warm, ours. She asked if Grandpa would live with us forever. I smiled, kissing the top of her head. "He'll always be close, baby, always." When Arya went to bed, I sat by the window again, the same spot where months ago I'd stared at an empty fridge and felt like disappearing. Now the lights outside shimmered, and the reflection in the glass wasn't a woman defeated by betrayal, but one rebuilt by truth. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it. You didn't let them break you. You showed other women how to stand again." I typed back, "You taught me how." Across the room, the job offer sat printed on the counter. A senior management position at a Bay Area tech company that had followed my LinkedIn posts about financial independence. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman once mocked for not handling a paycheck was now being recruited to teach others about financial empowerment. I turned off the lights and whispered to the quiet house, "We're enough now, Arya. We're more than enough." Somewhere deep inside, the girl who once feared her father's disappointment and her husband's disapproval finally exhaled. Because in the end, it wasn't the apology, or the money, or even the legal freedom that healed me. It was knowing I'd never let anyone make me small again.